Chapter 20 Esperanto. We have 5 days until the Nexus storm enters the system. Nearly 8 million people depend on how we conduct ourselves in that time. Our enemy is desperate, confused, and far from home. That makes them far more dangerous than any of us can comprehend. Do not underestimate them. Fight as hard as you have trained and remember your duty. We are fighting for the Coalition. We are not conquerors planting our flag on alien soil. We are here to save lives and preserve the future. To your stations and wait for the word. As soon as Ino finished her speech, she stepped down from the podium. All around her, the hangar bay was abuzz with energy as hundreds of officers departed, moving to rejoin their teams and put the ship on alert. Rylan put a reassuring hand on Ino's shoulder. Impressive speech. Did you write it? I wrote the first draft, Ino confessed. Lieutenant Commander Benny Nato deserves the real credit. She pointed at her second-in-command. Sota nodded and grinned at Ino. Honestly, ma'am, you should just take the credit. I'm starting to like being the power behind the throne. Ino, Sota, Rylan, and the rest of the command team started to make their way back up to the bridge. As they moved through the corridors, the voice of Axiom came over the intercom. Captain Esperanta, you are needed in the CIC. Ino looked at Sota, and they shared a concerned look. The group changed course. When Ino and her entourage arrived in the CIC, they found Prisbin looking concerned. Captain, one of the Destigan warships has started hitting us with a directed energy beam, but it's not doing any tangible damage to us. What? Sota said. Isn't Kailasha and her fleet outside of engagement range right now? They're about 1/10 of an AU away from us, a little less than a light second, Prisbin said, well outside the range of conventional weapons. And you said there was no damage? Ino asked. None that we can detect, Prisbin replied. But I wanted to... Prisbin trailed off. He had taken his eyes off Ino and was now looking at something just over her shoulder. Sota did the same, as did several of the tactical officers, until everyone was staring slack-jawed at something just behind Ino. What? Ino said. I see it, Prisbin said slowly. I can see it, Ino. Slowly, Ino turned around, and her heart froze. A Raj Zilfalin had appeared in the middle of the CIC. He stood with his arms folded and a most unimpressed expression on his face. Only primitives would mistake an attempt to communicate for an attack, Araj said. Perhaps I ascribe too much intelligence to your kind. Is that the Destigan you've been seeing all over the place? Rylan asked. Ino nodded. Don't you dare refer to me with such generic terms, Araj snarled. I am a prince of Decronia. You will address me with the proper honorifics. Sota looked like he was going to say something, but Rylan cut him off. We have the location of your fleet. Our weapons are already powered up, and we have a friendly planet behind us. No matter which way you look at it, you are disadvantaged. As an officer in the Savanti Armed Forces, I advise you to surrender. Ino was recovering from her shock. She was also feeling a wave of vindication and gratitude toward her crewmates. Now that everyone was on the same page as her, they might be able to plan a defense against Araj, or at least find a way to stop him from appearing like this. Defense? Stop me from appearing? Araj looked at Ino and laughed derisively. You speak like an insect protesting a boot. There was a moment of deafening silence in the CIC. Men and women looked from Ino to Araj and back again in terror. Ino's jaw fell open. For months, she had been refusing to consider the possibility. But now, a certain reality was staring her in the face. Even now, Ino's brain went through a reflexive denial, unwilling to accept what had clearly just happened. How did you... Ino slowly said. Your thoughts are so slow and transparent that my shaman can read them with little effort. You can hide nothing from me. Somewhere, deep in the darkest recesses of Ino's subconscious, a statement came to the forefront of her mind. It was a series of words that seemed to have no meaning, that were spoken in someone else's voice. The Coalition Science Directorate has determined that telepathy is... Ino could not finish the sentence. Not fair. On the far side of the CIC, Chief Medical Officer Zapata was looking at Ino as though he had just realized something. Araj unfolded his arms and began to pace around the center of the CIC, keeping his gaze on Ino. You have much to learn about the Destican ways, Esperanta. The Chamber of Elevation is lost, which means your transformation into one of us will be slower, much slower. But I have not forgotten the will of the cosmos. You were chosen to be mine, and you have delivered a new world to me, a dowry fit for a ruler. When I establish my new domain, you will be the most favored of my women. The image of Araj stopped pacing. He looked around the rest of the CIC crew and command team. Look upon me and know me, Araj said. I am Araj Zilfalin, and I claim this world as my birthright. The Desticans who are already here will pledge loyalty to me, and those who remain will become Desticans in due time. Now wait here while I proclaim my rule. Without warning, Araj vanished. One of the tactical officers, a man named Petros, called out from his station, Alert! Multiple energy beams now emitting from Kailasha. They're hitting the slave ships in the Caravaneer fleet and the Sanctuary Moon below. How long until Kailasha is in our weapons range? Ino asked. 22 hours, Prisbin replied. 20 if we start burning towards them now, but if we do that, it'll leave less time for us to double back to safety when the storm front comes. We may not have a choice, Ino said. We've got to get ahead of this. Come on, we've got to go to the bridge. Lieutenant Zapata blocked the door. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I need to evaluate you first. Are you serious? Ino protested. As a heart attack, Zapata replied. It's just, I've thought of something, and I need to check to make sure I'm not wrong. Come with me to the medical bay. Fine, but it's got to be quick, Ino said. Benny Nato, go up to the bridge and take the con. I'll be there in a few minutes. Ino followed Lieutenant Zapata to the medical bay, where he asked her to lie down inside the imaging chamber for a brain scan. While Ino was inside the imaging chamber, listening to the machine hum and whir, Zapata asked her a series of questions. Have you ever suffered a traumatic brain injury? No. Have you ever been diagnosed with an illness that affected the brain? No. Have you ever suffered the effects of oxygen deprivation outside of a training event? Once, when Deck 1 was breached 2 months ago. I was there. I remember I treated you and gave you a clean bill of health for that one, Zapata said. Why are you asking about this again? Ino said. Everyone saw Araj this time. You all know I was telling the truth. You're exactly right, Zapata agreed. But there was something else. Just the way you reacted when... Okay, I'll prove my point right now. I'm going to say something, and then I want you to reply to that statement with the first thing to come to mind. Don't think about it, Just respond. Got it? I understand, Ino said. Let's just get this over with. Ahem. The enemy used a telepathic weapon to communicate with us in the CIC, Zapata declared. Instinctively, without thinking about it, Ino said, "The Coalition Science Directorate has determined that telepathy is impossible." "Aha! There it is!" Zapata shouted. "I'm pulling you out of the imaging chamber now." Ino felt a tug, and her bed was pulled back into the open air of the medical bay. She sat up and saw that Zapata had turned a computer monitor to face her. "This is your brain," Zapata said, "and these lights are neurons firing while you answered my first few questions. Basically, this is normal brain activity during a typical conversation." Ino and Zapata studied the computer screen for a moment, watching Ino's brain operate normally. "Now, look what happens when I say something about telepathy." Instinctively, Ino started to repeat the line about telepathy being dismissed by the Coalition Science Directorate, but then she fell silent. On the screen, Ino's brain suddenly went haywire. Portions of her gray matter illuminated so brightly the screen ran out of colors to display the activity. At the same time, other parts of her brain seemed to shut down, as though someone had flipped a switch. "What the hell does that mean?" Ino asked. Zapata looked at Ino with a grim expression. "Please remain calm, Captain," Zapata said. "When I went to med school, I read a scientific paper that laid out the theory behind a technological device that could instantly modify a human's memory. Up until a few moments ago, I thought that technology was purely hypothetical." Ino's jaw fell open. "Are you saying," Ino breathed, "that your memory has been modified?" "Yes," Zapata said. "By who and for what reason? Your guess is as good as mine. But I clearly remember the write-up of simulated artificial memory modification. And this brain scan is a near-perfect match. As best I can tell, someone tampered with a highly specific memory that involves the concept of telepathy." "What can we do about it?" Ino asked. "I'll be honest. There's nothing I can do," Zapata answered. "Medically speaking, this is uncharted waters. But I do believe that your situation might be similar to the recovery of repressed memories. Clearly, the topic of telepathy is a trigger for you. I would advise you to be careful with your mental health. If you were to somehow recover the lost memory, you run the risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder. And if I diagnose you with PTSD, I would be obligated by Coalition regulations to remove you from command." Ino took a deep breath. "Okay, that's good to know. Thanks." Ino returned to the bridge after a short delay. When she got there, it was abuzz with activity. "What's going on?" Ino asked. "Quite a lot," Sota told her. "The Destican fleet has split up. 2 of their vessels are heading for the Caravaneer fleet. 2 more are making a beeline for the Sanctuary Moon. The last 2, including Kailasha, are coming our way at maximum burn. Time to contact." "About 10 hours, Sota replied. "But that's not all. A slave revolt has broken out on one of the Caravaneer ships. Aranoe just called us asking for help." Ino's blood turned cold. "Desticans, Savanti, or humans?" she asked. "We don't know," Sota told her. "The fighting started just after the slave ship was hit by one of those telepathic beams from Kailasha." The canned statement forced its way into Ino's chest like a dry heave, and with great force of will, she stopped herself from saying it. "And there's nothing else that beam could be?" Ino asked through gritted teeth. "Nothing else that would make sense." Ino wanted to disbelieve, to dismiss Sota's words. Instead of voicing these thoughts that might not be her own, she changed the subject. How does this affect our battle plan? It compresses the timeline, Sota said. Azarin will have to work faster. If that's even possible, we don't know. Ino swore. Tell her she needs to launch the vivarium now. Then call Elodie, have her stand up the Marines. Ino looked at the far wall, where a mission clock showed 3 different versions of the time. The current time at UN headquarters on Earth, the local time aboard the ship, and mission elapsed time, which counted how long it had been since Ino took command of Marathon. 2 months and 1 day. Ino took a deep breath. She knew this crisis would be the most crucial test of her command yet. She faced her bridge crew. Axiom, retransmit my next statement to all officers and team leaders aboard the ship. You're live, Captain, Axiom replied as the intercom blared the attention signal. Ino took a deep breath and began to give orders. This is the captain. The enemy is forcing our hand, so now we're going to play ours. The science vessel Vivarium will launch from Hangar 2 as soon as possible, and then we are going to come about and take the Desticans head on. I want all crew to eat breakfast at 0400 local time, and then we will go to battle stations at 0530. Strike craft will begin launching at 0535, and then we dance with Kailasha. I trust each of you to do your jobs efficiently. We'll beat the enemy and get back to safe harbor with time to spare. That's all. Esperanta out. Ino turned toward comms officer Indungane. Are you still sending updates on our situation to Coalition Strategic Command? Yes, Captain, I am, Indungane replied. But we still have not received any replies. What language are those updates written in? English? Send your next report in Esperanto, Ino said. Then she looked around at the crew. I might not agree on how the enemy is doing it, but the fact is the Desticans are absolutely listening into our conversations. Until we know otherwise, we're going to assume that they only understand English because Earth uses it as the language of interstellar diplomacy. I want to hear multilingual conversations between officers going forward. Use English and French as lingua franca, but put other languages into the rotation. We need to trip them up for just a little while so that we don't tip our hands yet. Tu vi comprenas? Ich verstehe, EW Officer Mancini said in German. Ino spoke to the ceiling. Axiom, all future conversations with me will be in Esperanto, and in the event of extreme emergency, you will resort to Morse code. Mi comprenas, Axiom replied. What the fuck is Morse code? Said Acting Ensign Yamada. Outdated form of communication, about 300 years old, Ino replied. Don't worry about it. We probably won't use it unless there's a disaster. Oh God, I hope turning this ship into the Tower of Babel is just a temporary solution, Navigator Raha said in French. Very temporary, Ino replied in the same language. A lot of planning had gone into this battle. Ino knew that there was a very real chance the Desticans had discovered her plans through whatever telepathy-adjacent system they were using. But if by some small chance her plans remained unknown, then this multilingual angle would be her last line of defense.
Destiny is hard to meet. It'll hunt you down somewhere along the way. Don't you see we're meant to be the prodigies that came to show the way? 'Cause I don't wanna rule the world alone. None of us can make it on our own. I'm screaming but I cannot hear a sound. The suffocation slowly comes around.